Well, normally we would go around the room and introduce everybody, but that ain't going to happen with 100 of you. So instead, I thought what might be kind of fun is for you to first get an awareness of how FEMA has kind of divided the country into FEMA regions and find out what region you're in. So for example, if you're in Region 1, you're in New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, I think down to Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And then you can go down in 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. You found your region? How many Region 1 folks do we have? That's just 2 of you? How about Region 2? Oh my God, well, it's New York. What the heck? Region 3? Region 4? 5. And here's the biggie, 6. Only 1. Where do you live? Oklahoma. 7? 1 lone. I'm sorry. 8. 9. And then 10. We all go high fives. Tim and I are from, I live just outside of Seattle, Washington. So there you go. Those were our introductions instead of going around the room. And I was going to have a whole list of questions like, tell us your 3rd child's name or whatever. But I'm in FEMA Region 10. I was in FEMA Region 9 forever. I was born in California, then I lived in Santa Rosa. And now I'm back to my roots in Seattle area, which is where the earthquake was last night. So this is what we do. I mean, we do cruelty on one side of the house. So we've got some amazing folks that do this full time. I personally think we've got the leading blood sport expert in the country on our team, Terry Mills. So he does all of our dog fighting and cockfighting work. And then Tim and I do the disaster side. So there's a quick idea of what field investigation and response does within the ASPCA. And we typically get out the door 30 to 40 times a year, so we're fairly busy. Last year, we were only out 23 times. About 2/3 of the way through the season, we're doing a revamp of our program. Because we've grown so quickly, we're trying to figure out how to be a little bit more effective. So we're kind of looking for a goal of that 12 to 15. So those of us who are working full-time kind of enjoyed doing a few less last year. But those of us that are junkies are all kind of also saying, let's keep it going because we enjoy what we do so much. We did 6 cruelty cases last year and 10 blood sports. One of those was a combined dog and cockfighting case. We just did one, last month? That was a dog and cockfighting case on 2 different pieces of property, which was fun. And then we actually did 10 disasters last year, 8 of them, that we went out the door. A couple of hurricanes, 3 wildfires, a mudslide, a lava flow. So when you're doing 10 a year, and you've been doing it for 20 years, it's not tough to get close to that 200 range. I really don't know how many I've done. I stopped at about 125 because it just made me feel like I was getting too old. And we'll talk a lot about this one because this was really a fun disaster. I've done quite a few different volcanoes, and this one was one of the more challenging. Because it was on the big island of Hawaii, for heaven's sakes. I didn't have to fly that far to get to it. And secondly, it had lots of challenges just because of the way that the kapukas were formed, the areas where the animals were trapped between the lava. So we'll talk a lot about that and some of the challenges that we had as we went. 21,647 animals assisted. So we're pretty careful on how we do that. We don't want to beef up the numbers. So if we are literally going out in the field and rescuing that animal from harm's way, we like to say that that is a rescue and we're saving that life. If that animal is then coming to us into a shelter or we're feeding in place, that's an assist. So these are legitimate numbers. And if you look down at the disaster side, over 9,000 animals, that's a pretty healthy number. So we're pretty pleased with that. And we'll probably get a few more next week when we go down to Louisiana, maybe. 54 investigations. Those guys were busy last year. 33 of those were cruelty. 21 were blood sport. And this is the part that I'm really proud of. Almost 500 criminal charges filed. That's pretty cool. When the bad guys go to jail, that's a good day, right? 278 on the cruelty side, 211. I won't go through those because you can read those, but you can see there's a lot of dog fighting work that we're doing, and that's just good work. So the next time you see Sarah McLaughlin on those horrible commercials, just bear with it a little bit longer, because we really do the work we say that we do. And that's kind of fun, being with an organization that actually puts its money where its mouth is and supports the kinds of things that we do. Just as a quick aside, you don't raise any money doing cockfighting cases. I don't know if you knew that. People really don't care about that as much. And even to a degree on the dogfighting cases. So it's really fun to work for an organization that has its vision and its mission aligned, right? And that's the last good thing I'll say about the ASPCA. Here are the states that we are active in 2018. If you're not up there, then why not? Come on, call us. Who are you going to call? I can't believe Washington, Oregon, the Northwest isn't up there, for gosh sakes. I guess, or your state. We can fix that. Well, we did have help, and this is a cool program that we have. They're called our response partners, and so we go out throughout the country, and I hope that many of you will join us. I think we have over 500 now, Joe, does that sound about right? And those partners then deploy with us when we have these cases. And so we get a chance to put a lot of unique volunteers in the field. And the exciting thing about that is they not only provide that expertise to us, but we give them an opportunity to learn a little bit about how we do it. We don't have all the answers for sure. We do it a lot. You'd think we would, but we don't. But it's cool when they can come in and say, oh, have you given some thought about trying this? So that reciprocity is really pretty exciting. And last year, you can see we brought over 1,000. 2 years ago, it was 1,700. Those are unique volunteers across the country that get a chance to come out and play, learn something, and then bring that back to their community and enhance their own animal response capabilities within their community. That's what it's all about. Well, and we also did a ton of trainings last year. 87 presentations, 6,000 folks that we got the good word out to. I don't know how many of you have joined our webinar series. You probably haven't, or you wouldn't be here because you'd be tired of hearing my voice. But we just finished one a couple of weeks ago, I think, or 20th of June on animal resource typing. Is that exciting? You're probably sorry you missed that, huh? And then I think next week I do one on county and state preparedness, which will be kind of a follow-up from a national survey that Tim will be talking about. And then I'm going to do, on the 12th of November, I'll finish that up with our new national survey on veterinary response capabilities. So these are all available on Pro. Well, hang on, because the slides are going to come at you pretty quick. And it was really hard trying to figure out what to share with you, especially on an airplane, which is where I do my best thinking. So we'll talk to you a little bit about how does an incident become a disaster, and then I'll get into the circle of disaster work, what we actually do during a disaster, and then talk about some of our capabilities. And it's going to revolve this morning around Tropical Storm Barry, which is kind of easy to do. And many of the updates I got for you, because I woke up at 2 o'clock and couldn't get back to sleep, so these are fresh off the press. And I think this is going to be a very exciting storm. And I was telling Tim on the way over, the reason it is because we haven't seen the level of water in the Mississippi ever before at this height as a hurricane has come ashore. For those of you that have been around a while, we have seen the Mississippi up in that 16, 17, 18, even 20-foot levels, but never when a tropical storm was coming in or a hurricane. So there's certainly the potential with any kind of wind at all to push that right over the levees and into Plaquemine Parish, which is where we were in 2012 with Hurricane Isaac. So I'm not ruling this one out. I think that there's a little bit of punch to this one, and it wouldn't surprise me if we were there as soon as we left here tomorrow. And that's the timing of it. They're now expecting landfall tomorrow morning-ish. But as you saw in the news yesterday, New Orleans has already experienced a lot of flash flooding. A lot of it is going to depend on when it makes that turn to the north. And as you know, when those winds are coming this way, if it makes a quick, hard right-hand turn, then the folks closer on the eastern side are going to get hammered. The folks on the western side might escape some of the wrath. But we'll see how this thing does. Whether it's going to be a hurricane or not, I don't know. I am a closet meteorologist, but I really can't make that kind of determination yet. And this is the latest and greatest. This was at 5 o'clock Eastern, so 4 o'clock? What's it say? Yeah, 4 o'clock Central. And there that bad boy is. Now, they said I don't even have to point that. Oh, I can almost see it. And the big thing is the amount of rain that's going to come in with that. You know, we were initially saying it was going to be about 3 to 6, and then it went up to 6 to 12. And as of this morning, there is a chance, depending upon when it makes the turn, we could be measuring it in feet. So you start getting up into that 24-inch range, it's certainly nothing like Hurricane Harvey, where we had 48 inches of rain, but it's going to be a significant amount depending upon what the timing is. And that's the color, and I'm going to try this one more time. How about that? How about this? Okay, how about the purple? That's a significant amount of rain. When you start getting into that, you're getting into that almost 2-foot range, 20 inches of rain. So there's the latest on what's going on with good old Barry. And it's hard being here because I spend so much time in New Orleans. I mean, we all kind of cut our teeth on Hurricane Katrina, right? That was 2005. And we've been back there so many times that now when they do get a big event, it's hard not to be there and supporting them the best we can. Well, I have to forewarn you that, that I kind of make stuff up as I go. I almost said a bad word. So a lot of these are Dick Greenisms that I'm going to share with you, so you can take them with a grain of salt. Those of you that know me know that I do kind of make stuff up as I go, but that's the fun part about emergency management, right? There is no cookie-cutter approach to emergency management. There are the basic fundamentals we all start with. And then after that, it's what the environment brings to you, right? And that's the fun part about my job, is no two disasters, not even the same hurricanes, treat the land the same way. So the fun part about disasters and managing disasters is trying to figure out, well, what's going to work best in this situation? And that's the part that's fun, especially internationally. All I did for 6 years was international work, and going into a developing country and trying to figure out what is going to be the best way to solve this problem, that's excitement. That's adrenaline right there. So anyway, I'm just giving you a forewarning that there is no gospel to this. There's no, especially on the animal side. We pretty much stole what we knew from the human side and have adopted it, but just giving you that little heads up that it may not make sense, especially when you think about how we respond to disasters worldwide. And I started putting little things about all the different countries that I've responded to. And each one of those is a lesson learned. I have a whole lot more lesson learned up there than I have best practices. You know, isn't that a horrible thing to be saying? You should have all the best practices done and never screw up. But even, 2 weeks ago, we were in Arkansas for a flooding, and we still screw up. It happens all the time. But those are the ones I remember. And I can tell you a lesson learned from every single one of those little asterisks that are up there, and that's why I think we're a little bit better at the job today than we were yesterday. Well, this is the famous kind of evolution or cycle of disaster work. And if you think about Barry as we're going through this, it might help. But all disasters start locally, and they're managed locally until somebody either puts up a white flag or says, I need help. So for those of you that are coming from a county perspective, that's your disaster. It's yours. You can do whatever you want to do with it. Now, if we have a little bit of time, then the federal resources may pre-deploy. So for example, on a hurricane, this one's an exception because it kind of snuck up on us so quickly. It was really a low that started out in that Kentucky area and dropped down and hit that warm water and was able to churn up very quickly. But oftentimes, like we've got another one out there right now, if you're tracking that, it's got about a 10 to 20% chance of survival. When that's coming in, you've got weeks almost, right? You've got a lot of time. So the federal government oftentimes will pre-stage their resources. They've done that in Louisiana because they anticipated that there would be something going on pretty quickly. So there's your incident occurs. Your local first responders are on scene. Hopefully some of you are part of that. They stand up what's called the Emergency Operations Center at the county level. If a lot is happening and it looks like it's going to overwhelm them, then they're probably on the phone to the governor saying, you know what, I think our county or our parish may be in trouble. The governor's watching all that anyway. There's quite a network within the emergency management world, so they're keeping an eye on those counties. So typically what will happen is the county will call up the governor and say, you know what, I think we need a declaration for this county, or this parish. And that's what happened very quickly with Barry. So a number of parishes, all 12 coastal parishes, got a county declaration real quickly. Then Governor Edwards came back and did a declaration for the entire state. Every time a declaration is made, it frees up more resources. So when the parish president or the mayor or the city council or the county council, whatever the governmental structure that you live in, when they make that declaration, it says, okay, now you get everything that the county has. You might get public works. You might get a lawnmower from Parks and Rec. All of those get freed up when there's a level of declaration. Interestingly, and we'll work our way around this as we go, once the governor stands up his EOC or her EOC, and then he started to get on the phone with Donald and saying, dude, this is bad. I think I'm going to need some help from the federal government as well. And that stuff, in the Clinton days, we started leaning forward on those presidential declarations. Prior to that, we had to wait and kind of see what the disaster was going to do. Then we learned, you know what, if we can get you resources on the front end, the amount of destruction is usually a little bit less and recovery is quicker. So now we lean forward. So just this morning, about an hour ago, and I haven't confirmed this, I've heard that the governor got a presidential declaration for the state of Louisiana. Now, when that happens down here, where the president declares the emergency, when that happens, then now you get all of the federal assets to come help you as well. So that's how those proclamations works. First at the county and the parish level, then the state. The state then solicits through the FEMA regions for presidential declaration. If they get that, then the FEMA circuit can then all come down and be friends with you. So Blake, or not Governor, what's his first name? Bell Edwards, got the state declaration on 10 July. And if he did get his presidential declaration on today, the 13th or 12th, that's pretty quick. So that says a lot about the number of times that Louisiana gets disasters. So does everybody kind of understand how all of that works? And then this one, look at this ugly thing. I should have color-coded it. But this is telling you all of the different agencies and all the different people who are involved in this process that want a piece of the animal pie, right? You're going to have your chief elected officials up on your far left, your city and county officials. They are overseeing emergency management. Emergency management then is trying to coordinate all of the agencies within the county, including the ones we work with the most, animal control. Animal control typically will have an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, with folks like us, a national group or another county group or whatever. And then you can see all the humane groups. They're usually there to assist in some way. You've got the Red Cross, you've got Salvation Army, you've got all these other NGOs and emergency services, fire, law enforcement, etc. And then you get these CARTs. That stands for County Animal Response Teams. How many of you know of a CART in your area? Wonderful. Well, Tim's going to share you some data that we just found out at a national level how many CARTs we have. And then Animal Search and Rescue, ASAR. Many counties now are developing, much like the USAR, the Urban Search and Rescue Teams on the human side, we're now developing a lot of animal search and rescue. So all of that stuff on the left is happening at the county level. And then you get at the state level, and of course the governor's overseeing that. He then is overseeing emergency management. Emergency management has seen all of these, like for example, right now in Louisiana, it's Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry, LDAF. It's Fish and Wildlife, it might be Forestry, it's all these different government agencies that have now been tasked away from their normal day-to-day job to come help with this disaster. And then on the federal side, if you get a FedDec, a federal declaration, now look at all the resources that you have. And by the way, the governor can also activate his National Guard, which what Edwards did last night. The state vet and Department of Ag is involved with that. But let's get down now into the Fed side, and that's FEMA. Of course, everybody knows FEMA. Health and Human Services. Anybody know why that's important? Health and Human Services is where the National Disaster Medical System resides. And the National Disaster Medical System is where the National Veterinary Response Team lives. I wish they were outdoors more, but that's where they live. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, USDA, who is the group that we work with most frequently. You got all those acronyms? There will be a test later. You have to go online to do it, though. Well, as I mentioned, all disasters occur locally, and they're managed locally until one of a couple things happen. Either you feel so overwhelmed that you have to delegate that away, and even if you do delegate it away, it doesn't relieve you from the responsibilities. You could say, as a county, I am so overwhelmed, I want the ASPCA to come and assist. I can't take that away from you. You are still in charge. So you better be watching what I do. You don't want me screwing up, because that's going to come back on you, not on me. So even though you delegate it away, it doesn't mean that you have been absolved from that responsibility. In most jurisdictions, animals belong to animal control, not the Humane Society, unless the Humane Society has a contract. Now, you take a county or a parish like New Orleans. New Orleans, the lead animal agency is ASPCA. They have a contract that handles the animal control. Their contract is not perfectly clear on what happens during a disaster. So you have to be careful when you are looking at contracts versus responsibilities during a disaster. And then if the county is overwhelmed, which means they've exhausted all of the resources, they've gone to interlocal agreements, which is county to county. They've exhausted what their CART, their county animal response team. They've called me, they've called their other NGOs. They've done all of that. Then they may go to the state and say, state, I need help. And the state then, if they get the presidential declaration, will then go to the feds and say, we need help. And we'll talk about what some of that help might look like in a bit. So in Louisiana right now for Barry, the chief elected official for the various parishes is what they refer to as the parish president. And it's interesting that parish president can be somebody who's never run for political office. In one of the parishes we worked in last year, it was a guy who was a farmer, which made it kind of nice for us. They oversee the Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. They have that's their form of emergency management. And of course, then there's animal control. In Louisiana, not every parish has a strong animal control, but that's true of all counties, right, in the United States. We just don't have solid animal control in every county simply because we don't have the budget for it. Interestingly, in Louisiana, they have a state animal response team called LSART, Louisiana State Animal Response Team. Been around a long, long time. Actually, they were formed before Katrina, and they do an amazing job. We have an MOU, the ASPCA has an MOU with LSART, we have an MOU with Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry, and we have MOUs with the parishes. So we can get activated in a number of different ways. So right now, Plaquemines Parish, which is just Plaquemines and Jefferson Parish, and parts of Vermilion, or excuse me, parts of Lafourche, have evacuated. And so we were on the phone with them right away saying, do you need any help getting your animals out? Louisiana has a really unique process that they use. Anyone who needs help with evacuation goes to what they call the parish pickup point. And if they have critical transportation needs, they will go to the parish pickup point with their dog. They will get registered, they'll go to the shelter. If the dog is small, the dog will ride up on the bus with them on the lap, If the dog is big, it goes into a crate and goes into a truck or whatever they have there, and will be there when they get off that bus. Really nice little system. So as of yesterday, all of the folks in Plaquemines were able to get out, the critical transportation needs people and their pets were able to get out minus 20 dogs so far. That was as last night. So that system works very well for them. And then, of course, at the state level, you've got, already mentioned, Louisiana Department of Ag and Forestry. Then there is an emergency management piece that works at the governor's level. That's the Governor Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, and then, of course, the governor himself. So there's all of these different levels that are involved every time that there's a disaster. And then you get into more of the federal level and the national level. It's interesting how folks they don't want you in their backyard until they really need help, right? Especially when you start talking about the feds. And especially when you're in states like Oklahoma and Texas. States that really feel that they should be a country of their own. California, we used to do that a lot too. We don't want the feds messing with us until we get a big disaster. And then we want those recovery dollars, right? FEMA has really deep pockets that you and I stuffed. And they're available for folks to get their feet back on the ground. So we don't want them until we really need them. So it's this conflict, isn't it? It's a really kind of a strange dichotomy where, you know, part of you is saying, Feds, stay out of my life. I want my swamp drained. And the other part is saying, ooh, bring them on, because I need some help here. Well, at the state level then, every state has what's called a comprehensive emergency management plan. And we call that the CEMP. And that CEMP, was it that bad? That CEMP is the guiding principle, the framework by which the state responds to disasters. And I don't know, I'm making stuff up now, but the vast, vast majority of states, when you go to that comprehensive emergency management plan and you wade your way through and find out where the animal issues are, it usually resides under what is referred to as emergency support function 11 or 6. And I'll define what those are in just a minute. And when you wade a little bit further, you find that the agency that typically is involved at the state level is Department of Ag. Well, as you can see from up there, Department of Ag isn't in the pet business. They don't know a heck of a lot about pets in most states. They know a lot about large animals. And they don't necessarily know a lot about emergency management. So they will oftentimes bring in partners or make arrangements or do kinds of things. Texas had a really cool thing going for a while where the Texas Veterinary Medical Association had the state animal response team under their wing. That worked really well, but then they lost the funding. So if you weed through these plans, you usually see this thing called emergency support function. Now 6 is mass care. Who do you think is the lead agency for mass care? It's usually Red Cross, yeah. At the federal level, it's still FEMA. FEMA had a falling out after Katrina with the Red Cross, but they've made up and they're sleeping together again. So FEMA and Red Cross are back on good terms, and that's a good thing for us because they have the capabilities the federal government does not. I don't know if you realize this, but federal government is not boots on the ground. Not unless they bring the National Guard. So FEMites do not bring boots when they come to a disaster. They usually are wearing a really nice polo shirt because what they're there is to help with the planning. There are not a lot of federal resources that will come and help you in your county. And they are never in charge. Let me say that again. FEMA is never in charge. Usually I get some kind of, what? What is that guy saying? They're not. So you can see that Ag doesn't necessarily know a lot about disaster work. Now, most states have hired an emergency manager within Department of Ag, and that has helped significantly. And then these are those state animal response teams that I referred to. So those are the various levels of state support that you might get. What do you think of that slide? Oh, this is getting really scary now. What'd you do, Tim? And then you get to the federal side. The Cajun Navy is not a federal asset, right? It's got Navy in it, but they are not federal. And that just drives home my point again, is that the feds are not really boots on the ground or dry suits in a boat. They might want to go out and do a tour with you, and they probably will prefer to be in a helicopter other than a boat. But that's not their job. Their job is to get you that boat, or to get you the funding to buy that boat, or to replace that boat if it sinks, or for that person that you rescued and they need new housing. That's what FEMA does. So hopefully you can get past this idea that they're going to save the day. They will save the day, but they're not going to put the fire out. So then when you start to look at all of the ways that the federal government is involved just on the animal side, it's quite impressive. When I first got in the business, and I think this was about the time that I'm pretty sure God was creating Earth, but we didn't have that strong presence with the federal government on the animal side. Matter of fact, when you went through, at that time, the National Response Plan, you didn't see anything about animals in there. And that was just 15 years ago. Today, animals is everywhere. We can thank Katrina for that. Katrina turned the animal response world on its head. And a lot of good things came out of a really bad event because of Katrina. So now we've got FEMA that oversees ESF 6 and mass care, along with the American Red Cross. We've got urban search and rescue that are now bringing animal people into their teams for those difficult situations where they get a fractious animal, they need somebody to handle that, which is pretty cool for us. And we're starting to cross-train more on the animal search and rescue side and the human side. That's pretty exciting. I've already mentioned that USDA is who FEMA leans on for animal issues. Even though they belong to FEMA, FEMA recognizes they don't have the expertise. So they made an agreement with USDA in about 2006, and I'll explain that piece of legislation that helped drive that, and said, will you take care of our animal issues? So USDA, APHIS, Animal Plant Health Inspection Services, Animal Care Division, created an emergency management branch, if you will, to help oversee animal issues. And there's APHIS Animal Care and vet services. I mean, these are all vets, so you know they got to be smart, right? And they understand disaster work, so it's the best of both worlds. And then somebody asked about health and human services, or maybe it was just me. This acronym soup that's up here, and then the National Disaster Medical System. Have you ever heard of that? We haven't seen it come out really since Katrina, but these are the guys that do it all. They've got the human docs, they've got mortuary services, they've got dentists, orthopedists, they've got all of these different medical pieces that will come together if there's ever a major disaster. And then hidden in there, way down at the end, is the National Veterinary Response Team. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. All right, so then this first piece of legislation, you've all heard of the PETS Act? Nod if you've heard of the PETS Act. Oh. So the Pet Evacuation Transportation Standards Act was passed in 2006. That was a Bush directive. It had actually been on paper prior to Katrina, but Katrina drove it home. So we got it passed around October of 2006. People are misinformed or don't quite understand what the PETS Act does. A lot of people think that the PETS Act says that everyone will include pets into their emergency management plan. It doesn't say that at all. What it says is that every planning entity, whether that be a city, a county, or a state, must include people who are evacuating with their pets. You see that subtle difference? It doesn't say that you have to go out and have a plan for animals. I wish it did. And we've been talking a lot about it's time for the PETS Act to be renewed, rejuvenated, jumpstart, jolted, something, because we need to start taking this to the next step. But the exciting thing about the PETS Act is it changed what's called the Stafford Act. And I think I have a slide for the Stafford Act coming up really quick. And the Stafford Act is really kind of the house that describes how all these federal government agencies will play together during a disaster. And for the first time, 2006, for the first time, we had language in the Stafford Act for animals. Isn't that amazing? I mean, pets have been such an important part of our society for generations and generations. And for the first time, 2006, we actually had it in law. And then we got a biggie that a lot of people aren't aware of, the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act. Do that acronym quick. This was really the powerful one right here. This was saying, you know, we made so many mistakes during Katrina, let's fix it. And here are all these lessons learned, and Congress said, you know, this stuff's not going to happen again. Remember that picture of Brown? And Bush, I think, is in the helicopter, and poor Brownie is down there, and he's just getting overwhelmed. FEMA just looked stupid, didn't they? So the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act said, here's our opportunity to make things right. And in that piece of legislation, specifically it said, let's beef up the Stafford Act, let's make sure that the Pets Act language is inserted, and let's get even more animal language going there. And about the same time that Bush did that, Bush also came up with a couple of presidential directives that I'll share with you in just a minute. And then what do? What are the national NGOs doing? What is my time? 10:30? I'm just going to talk forever. So the NGOs, and this is an amazing story that I just have to tell you. It'll be the only story I tell the whole day. This was during Katrina, and when Katrina blew up, those of us that were with agencies at the time this blew up, I was with a group called American Humane. And we were based in Denver, Colorado, and our circuit board lit up. We had over 3,000 requests for rescue. 3,000. It completely destroyed our phone system. We couldn't keep up. We had to bring in extra phones. We had to do all this kind of stuff just to keep up with all of these requests. That was just with American Humane. The same thing was happening with HSUS. HSUS was the big player at that time. So they were getting all of these calls as well. And LSU, Louisiana State University, and I believe it was even the School of Veterinary Medicine, agreed to take all of those requests for rescue, compile them into a single database. And the sweet thing was they also agreed to give us lat long for all of the addresses that came in and take out all the duplicates. When that was all done, I think we had 3,800 unique requests. Well, we're down there, we're busting butt, taking names, and about, I don't know, I want to say, everything is a blur. I was there for 47 straight days, but I think probably in about maybe 10 days or so, a week, I was sitting in the command post and I looked over in an inbox and here was a pile of paper about this thick. I said, what's that? And I started pulling it out and I saw all of these names and description of their animal, the address, how long it had been. I said, oh, certainly we've gotten all these, right? And she said, that's the first time I've seen them. So I panicked. And I pulled our big rig out of Lamar-Dixon, and I drove right down to New Orleans, and we brought all these people with us. Look at all the cool agencies that showed up. You've got Army, you've got NGOs, you've got LSART, Army vets, public health vets, you've got National Guard, and they all came under a single command structure, and we kicked ass and took names. It took us 4 days, but we nailed everyone on the list, and we brought back, I think, if I remember, it was like 180 live animals. Whether we would have gotten any more or not, I don't know. Fortunately, those animals were resilient, and most of them were inside homes, and so they were able to kind of survive. But that was such an exciting time to see everybody willing to come together. And guess who's under command structure? An NGO. Who would have thunk it? The day that public health vets will go under an NGO command structure is kind of a momentous occasion for sure. So that was a lot of fun. And then the other big national group I want you to at least have an awareness of is NARSC, the National Animal Rescue Sheltering Coalition. It's a group that I started right after Katrina. I was so frustrated that nobody understood incident command on the animal side. I was a volunteer firefighter and had been there for, I think, 10 years. And we just lived and breathed this ICS. And then we got to Lamar-Dixon and we got to this disaster and the animal people didn't know it. So I said, let's all come back together, and I will teach ICS 200, and then I taught 300, and then 400. Then we got some specific positions that we did the training. And all of a sudden, we were meeting every other month for the first year. We were so excited to come together as this big group. Somebody said, you know what, we ought to start putting up on the board all these things that we're talking about we haven't had a chance to get to. And before we knew it, we were filling these books of stuff that were animal issues. So an exciting group, and look at the people that are up there, look at the agencies. Every major national group, HSUS was a founding member. They're no longer with us. Best Friends was a founding member. They were no longer with us. And then you look over on the right, you got American Red Cross, you got AVMA, PetSmart Charities. We've got a whole bunch of other groups that we're looking at bringing in 2019 and 20. Pet Finder, AZA. So an exciting group of people that get together. Yesterday, how timely was that, was our monthly call. So guess what they were talking about? Barry. How convenient. So this whole group gets together in the morning, and then we brought in USDA, Health and Human Services, and FEMA, and then they join the call. So every month there's collaboration going on between the federal government and the national NGOs. So exciting stuff. Once again, you can thank Katrina for that. Well, let me get into the circle of disaster work, what Tim and I do for a living. And I'm sure you're going to be ready to sign up when I get through this crazy thing. Because that's a lot of stuff to cover in 38 minutes. Well, let's get going. We have those incidents that occur with a little bit of time. You can watch them coming. Those are the disasters like Barry, right? In some cases, it might be that we're watching fires get closer and closer to a community. And then we get those like last night over my bedroom that hit my little hometown with a 4.6. Nothing like the 6 point. What'd you guys get down in Ridgecrest? 7.1? Was it 2? That's a big earthquake. That's a really big earthquake. So you get those kinds of things. They just happen, boom. You've got no advance warning. None. So they kind of fall into two categories. You get the things that are evolving, and then the emergent ones, boom, they're just on you like a tornado. You might know that there's going to be a tornado warnings that day, but then all of a sudden it's just right upon you. And of course, when we're doing cockfighting cases and large cases, this is actually in New York City, in a tenement building in New York City. And this was the caretaker of this building had cut through the concrete and had built his own little dogfighting ring in the basement. And nobody knew about it. Pretty clever. Well, here's Tropical Storm Barry. This is what I was doing. So I tracked for you what my job is on the 11th, yesterday. What I was doing yesterday, when I should have been working on these slides, what I was doing yesterday. Of course, we started tracking Barry on Monday. So my job is that as soon as I see something brewing, then I'll start to gather intel on it. I'll try to get situational awareness on it. And I start tapping into all of my little resources that I have. And, I've got a whole category. I go to the National Weather Service, AccuWeather, the Weather Channel. I've got apps upon apps, and I go through all of that stuff to try and keep as much as I can in this poor, tired brain of mine. I also get I get all of the FEMA region updates, and I get the national FEMA daily sit rep. So there's a lot of information out there that I'm gathering, trying to find out what's going on in the disaster world. And then I start calling. Now, the advantage of being an old guy and knowing all of these people, I can call them. And I know just about every state vet in the country, and I've known them for years, so I can just call and say, John, what's happening? What's your thoughts on this thing? Or they'll call me. John Walther from Department of Ag in Louisiana called me 2 days ago and just said, just checking in, wanted to make sure you were aware of what we're doing down here. So we're calling all those folks, and then we have all of our MOUs that I talked about, and we have all of our response partners that we talked about. So we're checking in to make sure they're okay. What do you think is the number one request we get in a hurricane? It's to empty their shelter. Mm-hmm. They want their animals out so that they can bring new animals in, but they also want animals out because they get to start over. And so that's the number one request we get. And Louisiana's trying to stop that by making them have partners that don't do that. But that's tough on us. You know, as that storm is bearing down, for you to ask us, not you, but for somebody to ask us, can you come take 300 animals, which is what Jefferson Parish was trying to do yesterday. That's tough. It's tough to find enough vehicles to get down there and do it. So I'm communicating with all of those folks. I'm communicating with the state animal response team. It depends upon what state I'm in and what relationships I have. And then if we get a request, then I require it to be somebody that's the authority having jurisdiction. It has to be from somebody that legally has the ability to ask me. I never accept a request from a humane society because they're not an AHJ. They don't have that authority, that legal authority. Now, we will help them, but not from a FIR standpoint. We'll help them with reload, we'll help them do all kinds of things, and we'll help them with grants. But on the disaster side, we only work with the AHJs. Makes me sound kind of bad, doesn't it? The jury will forget that last comment. And then I ask for what's called a mission assignment. Now, a lot of folks don't do that, but I like that. A mission assignment is a very clear descriptor of what they're asking me to do. I want to contract with them. So if Louisiana asks me tomorrow to come down and assist, I will ask John Walther for a mission assignment. It'll have a number, and it'll describe all of the stuff they're asking me to do. Who am I going to report to? When am I going to be there? How long do they anticipate? What's been the impact? How many animals can we expect to see, et cetera? So that is a really important thing for me to have all that information, because then guess what? I don't get to make that decision by myself. I've got to go to my boss. Hate to say this, but I can't make that decision on my own. So I go to my boss, a gentleman by the name of Tim Rickey, and Tim Rickey will then go to his boss, and everybody will say, okay, well, we're about ready to spend a whole bunch of money on a disaster. Are you cool with that? Fortunately, they are incredibly supportive. And if we've got the bandwidth, we do it. We've never said no. We might have said not as much as you want or not as long as you want, but fortunately, we've never really had to say no. And then that internal capabilities means, what do I have? So for the Butte County Fire, Joe was running a shelter in Columbus. We had at least a couple of cases going on. Did we have another shelter as well? I think we had 2 or 3 shelters, a couple of cases, and then a really big disaster. So when I went to the internal group and said, okay, we need to respond to this thing, but we don't have a lot of bandwidth. So we said, you can have 22 people and you can have them for 2 weeks. They needed about 200 people for 2 months, and then they probably would have been happy. So then I start leaning forward. So remember, I started tracking it really on right after the 4th of July, but really I got it down into it in earnest on Monday. Started making the calls on Tuesday, and then I met with my logistics team. Logistics reports to me, it's just kind of a weird configuration within our organization. So we got them on the call and said, okay, let's start leaning forward. Do we want to pre-stage resources? And I will do that oftentimes on a big disaster. In Hurricane Florence, because we knew that sucker was going to be huge, I pushed a whole bunch of resources over to North Carolina, and we staged them in North Carolina. So when that storm got through, we were there. And we were the only group, and we were there in an hour versus everybody else saying, okay, we're leaving now, we'll be there in 20-some hours. So pre-staging resources is really sometimes can be very advantageous. Fortunately, I've never really got stung by it, but it can happen with hurricanes, where it'll take a hard right, and you thought it was going to go left, and now you're sitting there with a whole bunch of bodies and a whole bunch of stuff and nobody to go play with. So on Tuesday, I met with our logistics people. I said, please identify all of the equipment that we typically take, which is the boats. I think I have a picture of our personnel support trailer and our incident command post coming up. All of the equipment, the gins, medical, whatever, and let's just make sure it's all ready to go out the door. And it is, because they're on it all the time. We just come back from a disaster. I mean, it's not even been 2 weeks, I think. So it was all still there, ready to go. So that's how we lean forward. And that's really important if you're going to shorten that response time, right? That's our warehouse. 30,000 square feet packed. from floor to ceiling. And we started something several years ago called pods. So now what I've done is taking everything that we need for a 50-animal shelter, and it's on a pallet in either a black box or wire cage. So if Joe is going to run a shelter for 200 animals, we send them 4 little pods. So it's already been pre-sorted and organized and ready to go out the door in a heartbeat. And those logs people can push stuff out really fast. We can get a 53-footer in there and nothing flat. And then we have quite a few of our own transporters as well. So you can see that's a lot of stuff to maintain. We probably have got, I think we've got over 3,000 wire cages. We've got a poop load. All right, so then we get that mission assignment that I was referring to, coming from that agency that has jurisdiction. I either have an MOU in place, or in the case for Butte County, because I didn't have an MOU, I required on formal letterhead from that agency having jurisdiction a request for our assistance, just so legally I can cover my fanny, right? Then I get that tasking number in the mission assignment. This was a picture that I took when I was at the tsunami in Japan. Wow. I have never seen destruction anywhere in the world like I saw from that bad boy. It was just amazing. Can you see how high that thing is up on the second floor? Mm-hmm. Think of the volume of water that had to have come through to deposit that and then recede. It was just mind-boggling, the level of destruction. And then you get into the assessment. I don't know if you remember Hurricane Ike. Remember Ike going through Gilchrist, Texas? I was with the animal control officer, and we're trying to do an assessment. We're driving down that road. There's a house here. You drive a couple miles, you'd see another house. And I'm doing my little calculation of how many animals we should have in that assessment process. And we get back, and I said, well, I think we're going to have between 60 to 100. And he said, I didn't see a single animal. Well, what you don't see oftentimes will tell you what's going to actually be there. I know that doesn't make much sense. And we turned out, I think, sheltering about 68. One of the few times I was right, by the way. I don't want you to think that that happens on a regular basis. But there are ways that we do these assessments where we can kind of get a feeling for the kind of animals we're going to be up against. You wouldn't expect to find very many there, would you? But they're there. And guess what critters usually survive the best there? Well, damn cats, right? Especially the feral cats. And I've done assessments in so many different vehicles. I think these called, not knack-knacks, or did somebody say, I forget what they call those boats in Indonesia, but I spent 2 or 3 days on my haunches in one of those cities. They're very uncomfortable. And then you get into planning. And for us, we have a dedicated planning team. It's actually quite large. These are all folks that have completed their planning section chief training. They're very, very good at what they do. We actually create our own incident action plan within our own agency. So we're pretty good at that stuff. And this was a very interesting disaster. This was actually in Johnstown, Ohio. Probably back in that 99, 2000 frame. And the reason I put it up there is because from a planning standpoint, I don't know how many of you are familiar with egg producers. But at that time, especially, they were all built on cascading levels so that the excrement from one row will fall into a manure pit and not hit the animals below them. Does that make sense? And it's still that way to a degree. But when a tornado comes through, it just mangles that. And it's like taking an aluminum can and twisting it. It's that easy when you get those kinds of winds. And all of these poor birds were stuck in their cages. You know, at that time, they could have as many as 14, and a 14 by 12, I mean, they were just like packed in there. And so then you'd get into something like this, and you just couldn't literally get the animals out. So in my head, I'm thinking, well, we'll rescue those birds. There's 100,000 per building, and 3 or 4 buildings were impacted. We're looking at maybe 500,000 birds. You don't rescue 500,000 birds. So that plan failed. And then we went on to the next plan and the next plan. And I think I was on about plan 6 or 7. All 5 of them failed before I got one that worked. And none of them were going to work in the way you guys want me to finish the story. But there is a humane way of dealing with tragedy. And the industry was not interested in hearing about the humane way. They wanted to expedite it, they wanted to clean it up, they wanted to get ready, and they wanted to get back into business. The animal welfare world said that's not going to happen. These animals need to be treated humanely. That's where planning becomes a little bit more difficult. And then you get into this bad boy, which was a planning nightmare. This was probably the most embarrassing time I've had professionally. This was in Iceland. I don't know if you remember Reykjavik and the big tornado or the big earthquake, or the mountain that spews shit out. And so it shut down all European airspace, right? Mm-hmm. And I was actually over in London reporting out on our project in Haiti, and I was able to get on the last plane to get back to the US. There was a courier that met me with the bag, and then I was able to reroute over to here. So I met with Department of Ag, and of course they're very, very concerned with and they don't like it when you call them Icelandic ponies. Those are Icelandic horses. And so when we were trying to come up, I said, well, you know, I am a subject matter expert. My chest was way up here, my back was straight, and you know, I'm from the United States, I know all there is to know. And so I said, here's what we're going to do, and they looked at me and they kind of laughed, which was a little embarrassing. And the first plan I think I said is, well, just bring me a whole bunch of trailers and we'll just round them up and put them on trailers, right, Tim? That's what we usually do. Well, these horses had never been trailered. Do you know how hard it is to trailer a horse in the middle of a volcanic activity? And I said, well, I didn't mean that one. What I really meant to say was, we'll just herd them all up. And that same little snicker came. Said, well, that doesn't work. They're not shod. They've never been on. There's barbed wire. The only way I could find the horses, swear to God, you can see the volcanic wall behind there. You'd walk through that like you're going in a door, and you'd hold down the flash on your phone without it actually flashing, and then you could see all the eyes of the horses that were back there. That's the only way it was so hard to see. So anyway, after about 3 or 4 different plans coming to them, and after having them laughed at me, we ended up saying, okay, let's just shelter in place. And that's probably the first one we should have done, but I said, just get me a whole bunch of duct tape and we'll put them into buildings and we'll duct tape them and they can stand there. The problem is that the winters have been so mild over there that none of the horses wanted to go into the buildings. So no matter what I came up with, it was a bad plan. That was the end of the story, but so much fun working with the horses. And then we get into the fun part. This is the part that Tim and I love, that unfortunately, when you've been in the business a while, you don't get a chance to do much of it, and that's search and rescue. This is really the sexy part of our job, right? This is when you get to put on that cool equipment, you get to get out in the boat, you go places nobody else is allowed to go, you climb into homes and you pluck the animal out. This is good stuff. I wish I could do more of it. And then we're now, of course, getting into some of the technical rescue. That's really blurry, isn't it? So that's called an Anderson sling. Some of you are familiar with it if you're in the vet program. You've seen us lift up horses with that. We're now finding some slings that work a little bit better. But this was during Hurricane Floyd in 1999. We had a group that came over from California, UC Davis. They borrowed our sling. They paid for a helicopter. We showed them how to work it. We were the ground team from the water event, and then also when they landed them as well. And it was pretty cool. But unfortunately, these things you can get maybe on a good day 8, and that's incredibly expensive. I think the fuel bill alone was about $1,500. This is more of what we do. You know, that sexy part, I forgot to tell you that a lot of times the water levels go down, so then we're mucking this stuff from water that went, now is down to here, and we're trying to lug all this stuff over that. And we're in this crazy gear that's so friggin' hot, and it's already 90 degrees outside. That looks like a mess, doesn't it? But that's us. And if you don't get anything else out of this first session, this is gospel. You will not self-deploy. And that's even in your own county. You will not self-deploy. If you're not part of the solution, then you're going to probably be a problem. Mm-hmm. So you've got to make sure that you're working with emergency management. You're part of that recognized team. We'll show you how to do that. Call Tim. He'll tell you how to do that. That was Hurricane Floyd as well, by the way. And this is the famous Lamar Dixon. Any of you been there? I know some of you have been. Anybody seen it? Lamar Dixon is an expositional center outside of Gonzales, Louisiana. And this is where the vast majority of animals came from the relief efforts that were going on, the rescue efforts in downtown New Orleans. So on any given day, we had 1,308 dogs in that shelter. And the reason I know that so well, I was the ops section chief, and public health showed up one day, and they were in my face. What are you guys doing here? This is craziness. And I walked them through, and of course we had fans, we had extension cords, we had so many hazards. And he said, well, this is really bad, but at least it's organized chaos. So whatever number you have is what we're going to cap you at. So as the field teams were going out every day and rescuing animals and bringing them back at night, that many animals had to go out the next morning. So we kept that balance of 1,308. We guesstimate that we pushed out between 7,500 and 10,000 animals out of that facility. That's a lot of critters. So for sure, this was the largest emergency shelter in U.S. history. I doubt whether we'll break that one unless we get a big one in California. And even then, I hope we never do it as an emergency shelter again. I hope it's a cohabitated shelter. Are you going to talk about cohabitated? Okay. And then here's now we're getting down to the locals. So I took you, sorry for this long journey, but the more that we are developed at the local level, the better this operation will go. The less dependent you will be on the state and the feds and everyone else. So if you are not part of your own community, become part of it. Join your community or county animal response team. Join CERT. Get involved with the Red Cross. Whatever you can do to become an active member in your community. That's where lives are saved, because we can get there for you. And in Louisiana, it's easy because we're based in Missouri. So it's only 8-9 hours drive down there, maybe 12 at the most with our big rigs. So we can get there pretty quick. But it's the group on the ground at the time that saves lives, right? So those are the folks that we need to make sure we're working on. And that's where almost all of our effort goes to, not on necessarily building our capabilities, but building yours. And that's why you saw so much data up there saying about the trainings we're doing, the money that we're giving in grants, et cetera. And when you're strong at a county level or a local level, you get rid of these unsolicited, showing up people that just want to volunteer and help. And oftentimes they come in the package of a rogue group. And they're horrible. And you can't get rid of them. Once they show up, they're part of your community. You know, and some people would say that the Cajun Navy was a rogue group. Now, to be fair, in Houston, the mayor, one of the mayors in the local surrounding area said, yeah, we'll bring the Cajun Navy over. When we were down on the highway, all you saw was boat after boat after boat after boat. It was an invitation. Everybody had a fishing boat was going over to Houston. And so we had a lot of boats on the water that were more than likely saving lives, but it was chaos, right? The stronger you are at the local level, the less likelihood you are for having these volunteers that will just show up. And that's the Cajun Navy. Well, that's pretty cool. There's a lot of boats out there. But here's what would happen, is that this guy in fishing boat 355 would bring a dog over to us on the shore and say, here's your dog. And I said, well, where did you get the dog from? Well, I don't know, dude. Here it is. I got to go rescue some more. And so we had no paperwork. We had no idea where they were coming from. We didn't know diddly squat. And many of them were just fine where they were at. They didn't need to be pulled from there. So anyway, the stronger you are at the local level, the better it's going to be. You're going to see on my talk this afternoon this concept of field staging. This is where you set up shop somewhere that's convenient. In Louisiana, they kind of call it lily pads. Somewhere that's close to the action where you can set up. This is where I set up my vet team. This is where my vets do triage. So we will get them from the field. We'll bring them back to this lily pad or this staging area. We'll do triage, we'll stabilize, we'll package, and we'll transport. So you're going to see a lot of that in the talks that I'm going to do a little later on. And there's an example of just what we're, in the most case during hurricanes, it's just trying to get fluids back on board, right? That's a kind of a blurry one too, but that's typical for search and rescue for us. I don't know if you can make all that out. Does it look better back there? You can see the black lab. I don't know why it looks good here. So you can see the dogs in the wire cages, and you can see Bubba over here. And these are all guys that have been out, and this is typical of what we do for water rescue, where we'll use the wire cages. They get a little bit better ventilation. They're just not sturdy. Or we'll use the plastic varicannels. Usually on a boat, we only use the varicannels. And then we're ready to package and transport. We have a number of these specialized vehicles now. We've got a 40-foot, a 44-foot, and a 53-foot that all either have built-in cages or that we can modify, and then we have an entire fleet with our reload program that can help with transport as well. And sometimes you make it up as you go. Remember what I was telling you about the seat of my pants? I don't know why these got blurry. You can't see this. This was a volcano I was doing in Indonesia, and that's how we use transport, just pushing these great big oxen up into the boat. Or if they're really good and can self-prepare, and that works too. And what you'll see in many developing countries is that the pets, or the livestock, are actually more pet-like. And they will get in those tuk-tuks, or not the tuk-tuks, well, that's a tuk-tuk, but they'll also get in those little boats. They're very well trained and very mobile. So here are the sheltering options. For those of us in the disaster world, we really look at two different kinds of shelters. Those that are co-located, that's where the humanoid comes with their pet, and they walk into one building, and either in another part of the building or an adjacent building is where their pets go. That's called co-located. And they have to be close enough that the pet owner can take care of their pet during the day. That works pretty well. But the gold standard is cohabitated sheltering. This is something that we started about 10 years ago. It's finally starting to gain some steam. That's where the human and their pet stay together. And you get X number of square feet. You can set up your bunk, your cages, however you want to do it, and the family unit stays together. When we get the big one, hopefully not in Monroe, Washington, but when we get the big one in California, that is the model that we will use because it's the only way you can house 500,000 people. If you tried, it was interesting, we had a big exercise recently, and I was calling Eastern Washington and saying, can you guys take 50,000 animals? Yeah, let me call the Red Cross, see how many we can take. I said, dude, you're not listening. This is not co-located. I just need a whole bunch of tents or park spaces or somewhere where the family unit can stay together. That's how you handle large numbers of animals. So in your community, if you are not practicing cohabitated, you need to. And then we'll get into all of the non-sheltering options as we go. This was down in Mexico, and it was one of the best feeding and sheltering in place operations I'd ever done. But every day we would take those great big 40-pound bags of dog food, and every night we'd put them into baggies. And the really flimsy baggies worked the best, because as we were going by on boat, we knew we were marking wherever all the dogs were. We would just loft them. And so when they came down, they would crash, and that's how we fed the dogs. And then we'd redo their water. And no dog had to leave their home. So when the people came back, their dog was there. Why shelter them when they can stay at their house? Similar situation that we had in Hurricane Rita that came in right after Hurricane Katrina in Lake Charles. We'd learned all these valuable lessons from Katrina. Let's don't bring all these animals in. You know, everyone left, but their home is dry. Let's get their keys, or better yet, let's set up feeding stations and let the people who didn't evacuate care for their community dogs. We need to get out of the sheltering business. It's crazy that we do so much of it. But the rescue groups love it. It's sexy. For about a week. Then they're wondering, why the heck did we do that? Here's another example of trying to feed in place. What happens, of course, with a lot of floods is that the water goes up, the animal goes up, the water goes up, animal goes up. They get to this roof, they climb way up, and then the water goes down. Then they can't get down, especially with dogs. And then it's hot and dry and nothing to feed or water. This was Hurricane Isaac in Laplace, one of the best animal search and rescue projects we had done. It went so smoothly. I don't know if you can see up there, but the water came up and they got up, and cattle don't like going downstairs. They'd rather swim up to that. They were actually in the house when I got there. Grand piano in the house, and there was cow manure everywhere. But so we got them out to the deck and stayed there until we could bring our tech rescue team out there and get them off. But why not just feed them there? They've already trashed the place. But why take them into a shelter? It's just as good. And this is cohabitated. Look at that. Now, that's not one of the best ones. I have better pictures. But now the humanoids and the animals are right next to each other. Isn't that what you'd want? I've got some really good ones from the 2016 floods where the guy is sleeping on the floor so his dog can have his cot. Yeah, I'm talking to the right group now. And then you finally get down to this last part. I've almost made all the way around this doggone circle, and that's the reunification part, the part that we all want to see happen, right? We want to make sure that we're getting those pets back to their owners. And there's a lot of different places. And then all that stuff we used has to get cleaned up and sent back to the warehouse. So we started and finished up. And I want to just plop this. I think you're going to see this a couple of times. If you are a closet disaster junkie, this is the conference for you to attend. I'm a little biased because it's in my hometown, Seattle, Washington, actually in Bellevue. December 10th through the 12th. And it is going to be, I think, the premier animal and disaster conference anywhere in the world. And actually, this time we've actually got a couple of presenters, international presenters. And I'm sure we'll find something for you to listen to when we're there.